Hello and welcome to World Talks on TVP World with me, Marcin Krzyżanowski. As Donald Trump returns to the international stage with a high-stakes Middle East visit, regional shockwaves are already being felt, from lifting sanctions on Syria to deepening ties with Saudi Arabia and sharpening rhetoric against Iran. Trump's moves are raising alarms and opportunities. With us to unpack the geopolitical implications is Marcin Krzyżanowski, Middle East expert at Jagielloński University, to discuss Trump's strategy. Hello, welcome to TVP World. Thank you very much for taking the time.
Good afternoon, and thank you for your invitation.
Good afternoon, sir. You're very welcome. So let's start with President Trump's visit to Saudi Arabia. A few things stand out, in particular, arms deals, lifting of sanctions on Syria, and commentary on Iran. What do you make of each of those three things?
Most important issue is for sure the question of Syria. Suspending the sanctions is a major step toward the normalization in Syria. The economy of that country is shattered by more than a decade of war and conflict. And as in some parts, the fights are still ongoing. The visit to Riyadh, the meeting with President Putin, will entrench the position of President Ashara, both on the international and at the domestic level.
Okay, sorry, before you go into more detail, I just want to clarify one point. Now, this request to lift the sanctions, we understand, came from Saudi Arabia. What was behind that?
For Saudi Arabia and to some extent to Qatar, Ashara is a possible ally in Syria. After long years of struggle in Syria, and after long years of good and bad roller coaster style relations with Bashar al-Assad, the Gulf monarchies now have a chance to establish stronger footprint in Syria and fill the void left by Iran and to some extent by Russians, which are still present militarily in Khmeim and Tartus bases in Syria. As I said, that's only a first step, but a very important one.
Understood. Now, you mentioned Russia. What is the dynamic going to look like? There's the US lifting sanctions. Suddenly Syria can start to rebuild. Surely that's quite a lot of goodwill towards America. Where does that leave Russia? Because it's been investing in Syria for a long time, militarily and otherwise.
It's not clear yet if Ashara, or to be more precise, the rulers of Saudi Arabia and Qatar, will let Russians to stay in Syria. Most probably yes, as the international agreement signed by Bashar al-Assad and President Putin are still valid, as the Giuliani Syria inherited it from the previous government. So getting rid of Russians completely will be a complicated task. But with lifting a sanction, with possible investment from the Gulf states, with influx of some capital, the position of Syrian government will be much stronger, and the Syrian Damascus government will be able to get a much harder stance towards the Russians during any negotiation. And most probably, because we don't know details yet, details are sketchy still, most probably the Syrian government will be able to navigate, will be between various competitors in Syria, and it will not be forced to cooperate with Russia and China no more.
So what does this mean in terms of the geopolitical situation in the Middle East, in terms of stability in particular?
It's a huge step forward, stability. Of course, we are still far from ending even the most important, the major conflict. But during the trip of President Trump to the Middle East, they are trying, he and rulers of Emirates, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia are trying to create a new security equation in the region. And for example, dissolving of PKK organization, it's also a very important news regarding to that. If President Putin will be able to not directly, of course, but if he will be able to reach a deal with Iran, then altogether with the solution of PKK and lifting sanctions on Syria, will create not completely new, but not completely new environment, but new circumstances, and the situation will be much different than at the moment.
You mention a connection between Russia and Iran. Tell us more about that, because they seem to be developing an axis of their own along with North Korea and China.
That's true, although it would be too much to say that Russia and Iran are strategic allies. The cooperation between those two countries is strengthening every month. Now, after cooperation in the drone unmanned aerial vehicles sector, Iran most probably started cooperation in the rocket sector. Most probably, Iran will send a few launchers and a few hundreds of short-range rockets to Russia to help it in its war in Ukraine. The cooperation in the energy sector is getting stronger and stronger. Both countries also trying to develop some transportation projects via the Caucasus Mountains on the way to Arabian Sea and India. And there is also a lot of political coordination. After each round of negotiation on the nuclear issue with United States, high-level official from Iran traveled to Moscow to report and to coordinate the political efforts of both countries. And there are some rumors that in the next few weeks, President Putin will visit Tehran again to even entrench the mutual cooperation after the signing of a strategic partnership act by Iranian parliament.
Understood. Now, President Trump has reached out to Iran and asked them to stop funding terrorist groups in the Middle East and also to stop their nuclear program. In light of what you have just said about Iran's relationship with Russia, what do you think their response to President Trump is going to be?
Most probably, President Trump will still try to find a solution and a compromise with Iranians, as Iran is a very important issue for him. If he wants to stabilize Middle East and to gain his dreamed Nobel Prize, the agreement with Iran is a must. Without agreement with Iran, it will be hard to...
In a word, Mr. Krzyżanowski, very, very quickly, if you would, is there a chance that conversations could start between Iran and the US in this way?
There is a chance, but I think the agreement will be reached within the next few months.
Understood. Thank you so much for sharing your analysis with our audience, Mr. Krzyżanowski. Have a good evening.
Thank you very much. Have a good evening too.
Thank you. Bye-bye. And that brings us to the end of this episode of World Talks. Don't go away, though. Lots more coming up, as always. Goodbye.